Hey, and welcome to Vivit Talks. Today's special edition will be with Colin, who's the head of product and innovation for Capita Application Services. I'll be joining him and the rest of the Unicom team to welcome you to a virtual event on the 17th of July. So, let's get on, and I'm going to introduce you to our host today, Colin Deady.
Absolutely. So my background is one from software testing. So I've worked in testing and now more recently product, but testing for about 18 years before moving to product. And my testing career is very strange because actually the first thing I was ever employed to do was to test a virtual fish tank for schools. And I was doing this manually, and I thought there's got to be better way to do this. And I was trying to find automated scripting solutions and things like that at the time, not very successful. So rolled forward a year from that, I got a proper IT job. So this time I'm working in a pensions administration company in their IT department, and they asked me to manually test stuff. And my brain was already thinking automation. So I spent less than 6 months of my entire career focused on manual testing, and then it was straight into automation. Rolling more further forward from that, what I found very interesting is automation has to be done for a goal, for a reason. You know, if we say I'm just automating for automation's sake, well, you may or may not get a good result, but you may as well flip a coin to see if that's true. To get a good result, you need to know what you're trying to disprove, essentially. So you're taking a hypothesis, you're coming up with a test case, which is trying to disprove that hypothesis. I say the software is broken, and then run that repeatedly, and that's where you start to get the value. So I did that basically for most of my career in one form or another with functional or performance automation tools. And then gradually, around about, give or take a year, 2010-ish roughly, that's when I started thinking, hey, there's this thing called Agile. It sounds interesting. I ought to read up on that. But ended up running my own practice for Capita IT professional services for several years, from about 2012 to about 2018. And that was focused very much on behavior-driven development, good solid Agile principles, looking where we can make Agile simpler to adopt and simpler to deliver value and understand what value actually means for a customer. You know, it's and this kind of where my talk really comes in is I'm very keen that Agile is not a thing, whereas, and to be honest, neither is lean, neither is anything, neither is Prince 2. These are not things that are end goals in their own right. They are mechanisms that are valid in certain contexts, less valid in other contexts, and either directly or with some tweaking can help you deliver your goal or goals, whatever that may be. So then that rolls forward all the way to today, and head of product and innovation at Capita Application Services. And the innovation stuff is ... lean, ... agile, ... value, everything that can be put under those umbrellas. And on the product side, it's very much looking at things like microservices. I've got a thing called GeoAd, which is geographic location. So with that one, we're very much taking lots of different disparate data sources of information, and we're welding those together via microservices. And it's as lean as you can get. We only add a feature to that if it has some immediate value for a customer out there in the marketplace. But all customers can then take advantage of that feature. So it's not custom bespoke, it's essentially write once, use many times, which is the kind of software I like. And that is the really short version, I guess.
Well, it sounds awesome, and there's so many interesting things what you've said there, which I'm going to jump onto. And I was, I only recently learned that Capita, deal with all the smart metering capabilities as they've
We
got a
do.
subsidiary, yeah. And it blows my mind because there's obviously so much complexity around that, and it's kind of, to me, this IoT conversation has been going on for a number of years now, but it's only those kind of projects where you can actually see it come together, right? And so it's interesting where Capita have been. They've really kind of been at the forefront, and I love the fact that you kind of sat there leading this innovation, because that's really important, that we're looking at how we deal with the next kind of problems, and like you said, doing some GPX stuff, which is close to my heart, doing the MIT COVID project at the moment. And actually, so the last episode which was published, we had Michael Bolton and James Bark, and we did a round table discussion with the whole stack of people around testing in the wild. And everything what you're saying really resonates with that kind of conversation from the last episode. It was kind of, how do you make sure you'll get adding value to what you're doing. And I know you know Michael, and part of what they're talking about at the moment is this kind of session-based testing kind of approach, where they're trying to say, well, actually, exactly what you said, don't do automation for automation's sake. And there've been a lot they've both mentioned about checking versus testing, but they kind of modeled it out and said, okay, well, how much of that is environment setup? How much is that is root cause analysis when you're trying to find out, is it a problem, or is it something that already exists in a ticketing system? Is it a duplicate defect? Is it no? You're doing all these activities, and the actual amount of time you're doing for testing is very small. And that kind of value driven approach is to me is like a real game changer, because I think people historically have kind of got too kind of obsessed with, well, we're running 15 tests or we're running 30 tests. You can't say, well, what's the value of those 15 tests?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now my take on that, I don't know, how contentious my take is actually. I've never really canvassed, but so my take is that, is it valuable if a tester finds a bug in a system, a solution on the test, whatever it might be? And many schools have thought on that, and I've decided to come down on the side of no, it is not valuable. At best, it creates an option for future value, which is I now know something doesn't work, and the option for future value is, by making it work, our client can use that thing which today does not work. Until our client is using it, there is no value. You're in an intermediary state. You've got an option for future value. So then if you look at that more closely, you say, actually, having that bug existing is therefore a pointless irrelevancy. You don't want that bug. So when you look at all these glorious test metrics that say, how many bugs have you found in your software? How many bugs have you fixed in your software? Well, it's quite an odd thing. I've got 10 bugs in my software. Well, is that good or bad? Because is it 10 out of X? And I don't know what X is, so I can't give you a percentage. So I much prefer now to say that actually the value in testing, the fastest way to get to that endpoint of value delivered for the customer is to not have bugs in the software. Sounds obvious. To do that, you've got to have testers working really early, really quickly, really iteratively, and absolutely focused on that value, that delivery of functionality or whatever it might be, because it's not always software, that thing that we are delivering to that customer. To do that, actually finding a bug is getting in my way. Prevent the bug, don't find the bug, essentially.
Yeah, I love that, and I know you've focused on this kind of shift left approach, which is catching things a lot earlier. And I completely agree, kind of what you're saying with, how do you prevent it in the first place? And it's really interesting because the kind of two things. I love requirements engineering, so my books in the background are things like Tom Gilb's kind of language, and when Dorothy wrote, looking through, examining, inspecting documentation, all these things which kind of may pre-90s been the big, the obvious thing to do, whereas now we kind of fly forwards and we're doing things very quickly, and it's very hard to tie that back to the value, right? Sometimes it's for its own sake. Oh, we need to upgrade to this, or we need to do this kind of project. And it was really interesting so I was watching a Gartner talking about kind of the future of their Kool-Aid, of what they see as a prediction, and they kind of said that IT is dead, and what they went to go on to say was that actually IT projects are dead, in the sense of, actually now we talk about a product, right? And I know Google and all those kind of guys are talking about product engineering, but the focus is on the product, and exactly what you've been saying all along, which is the value that product gives you, or that feature gives you, or that experience, or that kind of capability. And what you're doing is you're driving that. It's not this is a project for modernization, or we're moving to the cloud, and as we're doing that, we're lifting and shifting and doing all these other things. It's actually, what does our customer need? What are their kind of hopes and dreams, and how do we engage with them and provide them value? And actually that's kind of bringing it closer to the business. It's closer to, well, IT is no longer just an enabler, which is kind of seen as a big money pit where things go in and the sausage factory comes out the other side with software. Actually, now it's okay, we've got a real problem. This could be COVID and our multi-channel or our multi-experience platforms. It's now actually about how we react to the situation or the behaviors that are impacting us, whether that be, new challenges, new regulatory stuff, or whatever that might be from a business perspective.
Absolutely. So very much what you're looking at there is understanding the definition of value, understanding what is, where is, how is, etc., that goal. If we cannot understand that value, then almost what's the point? I mean, the example I always give is Disneyland. So if I don't have children, so I'm speaking as someone without children talking about Disneyland, so I might have this completely wrong, but my understanding is you take your children to Disneyland because you want them to be happy, you want them to have fun, you want them to have smiles on their faces. Hopefully they've got a good restaurant, you can have a nice time, you want to get away from work, those are the things you want to achieve, and then your ultimate goal is kind of to come back with a nice pretty photo of you and Mickey Mouse, or a video of you going down some log flume, or whatever it might be. So you've got your goals, your values, etc. around that. What you never have ever is anyone saying, the reason I'm taking my children to see Mickey Mouse is because I want them to be Disney. So, or I want them to do Disney. That sentence literally does not make any sense. And yet I start to hear people saying, well, we need to do more testing. And then it's like a hard cut at the end of that conversation. Or the worst one, this leads directly into my talk, is that we're actually in that situation starting to hear people saying, I want to be agile. Or worse, and this is the one that really makes the fingers go down the blackboard for me and squeak like crazy, is when it's a consultancy that says the objective is to be agile, or the objective is to do more testing. And you say, no, that's a thing that could enable some future value. It's options again, potentially, or sometimes not. If somebody comes in and says, you must do Scrum in this way, or you must do your testing in this way, without understanding that value, without understanding the customers down the stream and what they actually want, what they actually value themselves, then it's all going to be wrong. I've seen naming no names because they're a competitor of ours. I've seen an Agile consultancy turn around and say, you should do Agile, and we acknowledge that Agile is not Scrum, so therefore you must use Kanban. And I'm there going, well, hang on a minute. Kanban is good in certain contexts. Scrum is good in other contexts. Hybrid approaches are good in a third set of contexts, etc., etc. How can you say that someone should use X just because they are trying to start from this point of being agile or doing more testing? I think it's a very dangerous thing to hear. I do not like that we are hearing it more and more in the industry, and I think it is devaluing testing and devaluing agile as a result, unfortunately. We need to do something about that. And kind of in a roundabout way, my talk for Unicom is very much a very polite railing against that. It's not bashing Scrum, although I'm saying how lean is your Scrum, so I'm using Scrum as the straw man, I suppose. You could insert anything else there. You can, how lean is your Kanban, how lean is your waterfall, put anything you want in that. The point is, I'm using it as an example. And I want us to start challenging these preconceptions that X is always true, therefore Y. Well, no, I need to understand why before I define my X, my outcome, my value, my goal. And that might change. In fact, that will change. So that means the method, the mechanism by which I deliver must also change as well.
Yeah, and I think it's that's a really interesting thing to say. And I remember, I think about similar to when you said back in 2010, I joined a consultancy in London, and we started talking about enterprise agile, right? And we did a book on it, and it's BGSS, so it's easy to say. They published this book, and myself and Stefan Zavakovic, who'd kind of come from your maturity kind of thing, so your kind of TMMI, CMMI background, and there was a talk. They came in. You would come in and work out where they were and where they need to go to, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because kind of where you're kind of saying, well, your baby's ugly, or this is not the way to do it. But if it work, what works for them is very unique. It's a DNA, right? And we could go, and I know you've got like Six Sigma, which is highly relevant when you look at these kind of landscapes, and things like DAD and less and safe, and then you've got ones that I love at the moment are IT for IT, because it encapsulates the whole landscape, including, whereas ITIL and things like agile methodologies just seem to be not interconnected. And obviously Prince has kind of died, and all those really nice things that we used to like were all very domain specifics. They're very kind of, I'm a BA, therefore I need this, or I'm a PM, I need that. And it's interesting because I know Seb is before you talking about BDD, and I remember a really great conference when I was in Australia called Fusion, and it was the first conference that kind of brought all different types of disciplines, developers, testers, project managers, business people, and not had separate streams. They're all blended together, and it became this kind of really interesting conversation. And I remember sitting down with Elizabeth Hendrickson at the time, and we were both sat there, and Alan Page had just spoke about kind of the stuff on how Microsoft tests, and his laptop had just crashed, which was a Microsoft laptop, so we were all digging out our Apple laptops to make sure we didn't have that same problem. And then Elizabeth was kind of talking about the ATDD landscape and the acceptance test driven development, and I really like that, and it kind of where the specification by example for Goico kind of I really like the idea of having samples, and it could be something like as simple as, okay, I'm going to do for this particular table, I want some security, header security. And my friend Adam, who spoke at the last podcast, had just done an OWASP security conference last week, and they were showing how they could look at, how you'd inject different types of value. But, part of it is that was always my dream, is that Gherkin specification by example would have turned into this kind of, it doesn't matter if it's an API, it doesn't matter if it's security, it doesn't matter if it's accessibility, it doesn't matter if you're doing whatever it may be as an activity, right? It add value, and it was part of the business going out, well, I need it secure, or I need it non-functional requirements for it needs to be performance, or it needs to be resilient from a site reliability engineering perspective, or it needs to be a chaos engineering kind of script of what happens when I bring this service down, or this DNS is, happens, or I'm doing an A/B test and something goes wrong. There's all these different things, what felt like it should encapsulate. And I remember having cocktails with Dan North at Star East, and we were sat there and we were talking about the whole BDD landscape and about kind of where it had gone, and the fact that it kind of turned into something which he'd not kind of expected, because he was a big developer advocate, and at the same time, so he really wanted to see the behavior driven to be focused around these behaviors, and maybe to a level 2 or 3 steps above, in the sense of exactly what you said with Disneyland, right? So Disney's one of the customers I've dealt with in the past, and I loved it when they did the Disney band, right? But the idea behind that Disney band, and like what you do with the GPX stuff at the moment, is that loads of people are trying to use the toilet facilities, they're broke. Predictive maintenance can kind of start saying, well, actually, let's avoid this. Let's direct people to another location. Let's increase their happiness by controlling, their behaviors, what they're trying to do. And I remember when, I don't know if you ever heard about Universal was going to build a theme park in London. I
did.
Yeah, and we were doing some bid work for it, and with Hitachi at the time, and we decided we were going to offer rides as a service, which kind of to me was anything plus as a service at the time was just the way to go about it, right? But the idea of as a service, like they provided trains as a service to the UK government, which was actual physical trains. The government didn't pay a penny. It was based on the amount of uptime of the fleet, which was based on the infrastructure, which was obviously National Rail. So it's out of their hands anyway. But they were doing predictive maintenance, 10,000 IoT devices on each train. It was scanning the rail as it was going down and offloading the information to National Rail to say what the infrastructure was doing. It was doing all sorts of kind of, new types of behavior, which it was trying to do, where you could walk up to a train and it could push you. Oh, well, actually, Jonathan, you've done, you're a loyal kind of responsible person. You go and sit over here, or, social distancing. So we've allocated you this new seat. All that kind of stuff we kind of expected as standard, right? And Disney, as rides as a service, our proposal was, video analytics. We'll have a look at how much they scream, how happy they are on their face, to work out, well, actually, that's the end user, right? If they go wait 3 hours in an actual line, and then the reaction is low and the sentiment analysis is poor, then have we just invested 100 million building a new ride, which is the fastest ever, that actually people don't like? So, this is my kind of interesting question back to you, is that, what is this, that shifting earlier into the life cycle, catching stuff, but also understanding your end customer better and the shifting right kind of aspect. How do you feel that's changing the landscape for how people, learn from what they've released in these kind of using these different tools and methodologies?
So I can see a change in terms of user, customer research, etc. People put various brands around it, UX, customer experience, whatever. In my book, they're variations on a theme or multiple themes, but they're still trying to get to the same end bit of understanding, which is, I am here today with a computer in front of me, and I can type any software you want. I can do if statements, I can do loops, I can do whatever you want. I can integrate this service with that API. I don't know which ones to do unless I know something about that customer, something about what they will value. I need to understand potentially their business domain and their market. I can give you an example. So back in, I don't know, let's say 10 plus years ago, something like that, I was working on a public transport system. And this is, the typical thing where you've got an LCD or an LED rather display, and it says your next vehicle is due in 10 minutes, or it's late, or it's whatever. And I work very much on the test side of that. I was the test manager for that project. This is pre-Capita. And we implemented a system that had the concept of lateness. So when a vehicle would arrive and it would be late, it would say it's a minute late, 2 minutes late, whatever. And we just coded this as software because we've been given a requirement. The requirement says, however late it is according to the database, according to the triangulation and the algorithm that calculates it, etc., write that number into a database field, display that number up on the screen. So it's a very kind of functional requirement, no customer understanding behind it. And I was really unhappy and uneasy about implementing this because I could foresee a problem based on my experience. And classically, it's this, right? Imagine you're at an airport and it says your plane is 10 minutes late. Well, 10 minutes in the scheme of flying for many hours is nothing. So I'll probably still walk to the gate. If it says half an hour late, I don't know, do I get a coffee beforehand? I'm not sure. Problem is, if it says it's an hour or two late, I don't know what to do. I've lost my context as a human. Does that mean I can now go for a meal? Will it suddenly become less late? Can planes catch up? I don't know. I don't fly them. And that's the situation we had with this public transport, where I was very uneasy with this idea that we'd be having people, this is buses, so people are standing at a bus stop, and it says your bus is late, and as it goes over a certain number, people's ability to understand that as an absolute that I'm in control of. If it says it's 1 minute late, to not nip into the shops to get the paper. If it's 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, you're not sure. What about 20 minutes? If it's 20 minutes late, that sounds like I've got enough time to go and get a coffee and a paper, but maybe I'll miss the bus. So you put this person into this weird seesaw position where they are stuck. And we had conversations with our client, and what they realized as we were implementing this was exactly this. And they actually said to us, stop implementing the requirement like that. Let's have that understanding. Because if we're going to basically understand the life cycle of the customer, in this case, their customers, who are people standing at the bus stop, what we've got to do is ensure that we make certain of what will happen if we put them into an uncertain state or not put them into that state. So we have to treat people like machines, essentially. So we came up to the conclusion that the absolute borderline threshold, and we did this from some user research, but the borderline was 20 minutes. If you said any longer than 20 minutes, your bus is late, the person has no idea what to do. Because if it's 30 minutes, that is easily enough time to go and do something, but how much of something? And you literally cause the person to not know if they should leave the bus stop or not. So up to 20 minutes, it would say the bus is late by X, i.e. however many minutes. Over 20, it would just say refer to timetable. And that was intentionally done to enable people to make that decision where we're saying above 20 minutes, we're handing all of the control back to that person. Whatever decision you make is your responsibility, but go and make a decision, rather than saying to them, you have to make a decision based on information that is not strong enough for you to make a decision either way. So we actually took that worry away from people. It sounds a bit weird saying refer to a timetable, but it's quite good. You look at the timetable, it says that the bus is 30 minutes late, but the next bus is in 35 minutes. I know I should just forget this bus and get the one after. People can make that decision. It's an empirical decision they can do by looking at a timetable rather than obeying what is essentially a computer telling them to do something. I think, in answer to your question about shifting it early, look at the life cycle of the customers. I would say roughly, give or take, a decade or so ago, which is when we were doing this, that's when that started to become really interesting. When you roll forward to today, you see this regularly, that kind of approach about saying, don't implement a piece of functionality, solve a problem. And by solving that problem, do not put a human being into an uncertain state is really important. We always used to joke about those Windows pop-ups. It said, do you want to save your work or not? And the options are okay and cancel, things like that. Where the options don't quite say what the question, the question is a yes, no question. So I expect a yes, no answer. Even worse, when the answers were okay, okay, no, and cancel. Well, what's the difference between no and cancel? So we do not do user interfaces like that now. We have these good quality conversations, but they've got to be early. They've got to be pre-code for the first bit of functionality, during and after that first bit of code for the next piece of functionality. It's a continuous revolving conversation. What I've actually seen, this is something else I cover in my talk as well, is this idea that everything must be done up front. Now, old school waterfall, etc., that's the way life was. But quite often now I've seen people talking about user experience research that is done, as in done, before the act of development. And I sort of wonder, why do our customers only get one say in a piece of software at the start? They need that say at the start. It's their software, we're delivering it for them, but they need to repeatedly be engaged with that conversation. I worry when that's not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess from our traditional kind of, like you said, V model kind of waterfall, you'd have, UAT, right? Or, some kind of other phase that helps validate it. But I actually think it's a really interesting what you kind of said about the buses. So, going back to the trains, when we were trying to build our SLAs to get the paid as a service, we took the model which we used in Japan, which was for the bullet trains, right? 3 nines on time, every time within about a minute window. Now, obviously in the UK, that just doesn't work because has anyone ever caught a train on time? Do they even come on time? Is one of those kind of questions. Culturally, it's completely different, right? And so part of lifting and shifting a methodology, what might culturally have worked somewhere else may not work for that and under different circumstances as well. So it's really interesting one because, what we've been doing with MIT is the exact same thing as you're talking about is, okay, how do I identify multimodal transportation? How do I identify that you've got on a bus or you've decided to give up on a bus and walk to your location, or you've decided to get an Uber, right? So yeah, of course, your GPX information is going to give you some kind of speed value kind of thing. So you can understand, okay, it's 3 miles an hour, it's this, it's 8 miles an hour, it's a bike. It's a Boris bike because you've just jumped on it and you made a run for it, or you can cross-reference that information about the timetable, real-time tracking of the buses like Google does using their APIs to then say, okay, yes, they were definitely on this bus. And actually from what we're doing from a contact tracing perspective, that is, okay, they're on a bus or a train. There's a good chance they're with other people that have sat around sharing the same air conditioning, they're at higher risk, right? Especially if somebody's reported who was on that train later on, up to 2 weeks later, that actually they caught the virus. You've got to be able to get that level of degree of accuracy. And it feels like, when we, like I mentioned with the kind of the train passing the information to the infrastructure provider, it's the same kind of thing with the train timetables is, part of that ecosystem has a dependency model on everybody else. And, one of the things we did, which I thankfully didn't get implemented on the trains, was this idea of, someone's taken a photo out of the window of a castle in the background, legal one. And, part of it is then the computer vision says, that's Conisbrough Castle. Would you like to go and visit it? And pushes you a notification. And then you go, hold on a second, privacy by design. I didn't consent to you to, even though I was using your free Wi-Fi, to look at what you were searching for. And also because I'm searching for tickets for a show, you then push me a concierge service saying, you want to go and see Cats? We can get you a discount. And, try and pull together and say, well, actually, we're arriving at 1:30. We can get you a dinner meal beforehand at a restaurant around the corner and book you this experience and go you there as part of a deal. that kind of, what we're seeing with the virtual personal assistants and that complexity of, whether it's Hilton providing you the, a digital key, or iOS 15 giving you somebody's car keys to unlock their car with your phone. Part of it is, I think we're going to start seeing these chains of companies that work together to help you in the sense of achieve your goals. I'm a vulnerable person. I'm at the bus stop. It's raining. I'm cold. I'm trying to get to the hospital. Does the hospital get notified that actually they've got vulnerable people and they need to go and pick them up, or, that actually they're not going to be able to attend their session, so they need to reschedule it with somebody else? I think the complexity is increasing. The M2M, what we kind of expected, machine to machine interactions, IoT. These scenarios are exactly what you've said. It's customer focused, value focused. What's the value for that person waiting in the rain? And also, it's this kind of ability to understand, how do we, keep on validating that to prove that the hypothesis is still correct, and that actually the behaviors that we're trying to encourage actually do happen, or behaviors potentially change, like COVID, and that we have to change the system we have. And instead of going through some CR system, we go through a iterative agile approach.
Totally. So it's interesting you say about behaviors. So behaviors we want to encourage. So I'm a firm believer that we should give human beings enough information from a computer for the human to make their own decisions, but that we should put boundaries around it where appropriate. So, for example, I should not be able to log onto your bank account and steal your money. Take that as read, obviously. So there's a put in there. But I should be able to go and sign up to a bank account very easily online. Now, interested all fairly to various banks out there, I won't say which one. I did that recently. I just did an experiment, set up a new current account with a bank using my smartphone. And as I'm signing up to this bank account, it says, please upload your ID, please do this, please do that. And every option it had, it basically says, if you select this option, this is the easy and fast route. So it's trying to guide me in that direction. So of course, coming from a testing background, I picked all the hard options. So every time, so when it said like, the best ID to upload is your passport, that's the one document I didn't give it, for example. So I'm picking all the hard options, and it still guided me through. It still helped me get to that end result of getting a bank account. At no point did it do computer says no, or you have to go on a phone call, or here's a Word document. No, worst one is, here's a PDF document, please go and fill it out, and then you find half the fields are locked or something like that. None of that nonsense. Even when I was sending it down the hard routes through the workflow, it was helping me out. And this is an interesting point, because when, one of the things I did at Capita not too long ago, well, I say that a couple of years ago, is we worked on a project with Southampton City Council. It was a public partnership digital transformation. The really interesting thing was how we engaged on user journeys. So historically, these things would have been written out as monumental requirements documents, preconceived, predetermined, and they're almost as locked in stone as you can almost see a Roman there chiseling out the stone. They're locked like that. Southampton wasn't that. We had very good quality conversations, both with internal stakeholders, internal users. So these are people working for the council, and members of the public, and councillors, and the council CEO, and our own staff. Everybody was involved. This meant every piece of functionality that went out the door went live, and it went out live very quickly, each piece. It was very highly iterative. We did not run a fixed sprint length. We ran a variable sprint length depending on how fast we could deliver. Why hold on to software for an extra week if I can go live with it today? So we were sending things out very quickly. At every single point, we understood the meaning of value. We understood the behaviors we wanted to encourage. Good example. There is a process in every council to apply for a blue badge. So if you are qualified for a blue badge, typically for disability, you can get one. The process to get that blue badge was quite convoluted, many forms, paper. And there was an odd situation where, to renew the blue badge, you had to drive to the council's office, park the disabled bay outside the council office, take your existing blue badge into the office, and then they would do the paperwork to give you the update. The problem is, when you went into the office, you're parked in a disabled bay, taking your blue badge out of your car to take it into the office. You have traffic wardens walking up and down, and they weren't really clued into this. And they did have scenarios where a traffic warden, unfortunately, was putting a ticket on someone's car because there's no blue badge in the window. So clearly, manual workflow, that does not work. We solved that in the software. We made it, you can do this online. It's really lightweight. It's not 1,000 questions. There's an easy route through the solution for blue badges and a slightly more complicated one depending on X and Y and Z factors. The easy route through is if you fall into these categories, tick the box, your blue badge is just done. You do not have to submit your old one. You do not have to go and park in a parking bay and take your badge out the window and risk getting a ticket. Obviously, those tickets were refunded. I'm not saying people were, I'm not trying to claim the council was mean or anything like that. All I'm saying is it created this kind of edge case that had to be dealt with separately. All of that's removed. Instead, we have this high quality end-to-end process so people can log on, follow this, get their blue badge, job's done. Even if they fall into a more difficult, challenging route because of other factors, whatever they might be, every single one of those was modeled as a workflow. It was modeled with real users. It was modeled with the call center staff. So the people that would be handling the, if someone phoned up and said, I don't understand the question online, it would be modeled with the call center staff so that they would be able to give encouraging information back to enable the right decisions to be made. That's one of many journeys. I think it was 76 plus journeys on that project. It was like 35 sprints worth of work, three teams working on this concurrently, value delivered every week. That happened because it was about self-service. It was about that empowerment of the individual, understanding their value needs, their requirements, and what we had to do to support that. It was not just coding software. So we did not take a paper form and reproduce it as an electronic form. We would challenge every single question on the paper form and say, is this question meaningful both for the person who has to fill in the form and the call center team who has to process it, or can the computer automatically process it? That's really important. And I think we're seeing that with coronavirus now. When we're seeing solutions created for coronavirus, whether it's contract tracing, whether instead it's peer-to-peer, whatever it might be, these have to be as self-service, easy to use as possible. The worst thing that would ever happen is if someone says, you imagine the situation, obviously this wouldn't happen, but imagine it, the NHS phone you up and they say, so-and-so you came into contact with has been diagnosed with coronavirus. Please fill in the following 50-60 questionnaire that we're going to send to you. Again, in a locked PDF that you can't even answer, it'll fall apart instantaneously. It's got to be lightweight, light touch. The end result, the value that's wanted, NHS, government want to know people with coronavirus are staying at home. People who may have coronavirus are staying at home. That's what they want. It reduces the likelihood of transmission of the disease. To get that, they have to make it easy for the likes of you and I to use any system. And if that is easy, we are more likely to use it. We're more likely to follow the rules, etc. When something becomes complicated, the edge cases start to outnumber the cases. We should not go in that direction. And today, I do not think we're going in that direction, which is good.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it's interesting what, obviously, as you know about the NHS app, which is now being canned and obviously came under massive amounts of controversy, was kind of two things. Obviously, GCHQ deciding to go down a route which was a non-standard route, which is, where we have some generic Bluetooth APIs that we're creating to get the beacon data out quick from Apple and Google. But we want to use our own proprietary stuff. Probably not the greatest way to do. Being open makes a lot of sense. Being, in a way, more lean about making, not duplicating that you're all developing similar technology that sits on top of a stack that actually just becomes part of one of those services. But it's interesting what you say with councils, because I love working with councils. They always used to be my favorite. But one of the reasons they were our favorite was, Council X would upgrade Oracle to 11G and pay $500,000. Council Y would pay $500,000 to upgrade to a new version of software. And you used to look at them going, why are these all working on similar capabilities as separate organizations, separate companies, right? You would expect your councils to be, able to deal with not all building capabilities. Like I remember doing the one for Ealing, right, where they took photos of broken down rubbish or graffiti, and then they tell you that it's been cleared. And it was a great Microsoft use case, which they use. But you're thinking, okay, we've done that now. So let's now roll that out to all the councils and use it as a service, right? This is why we do it, not make it so that every council's building their own relative technology, right? So it's really interesting case study. The other one is around the gov stuff, which I've done a lot of secure gov, and I like the UK government. Just finished helping them with their Brexit stuff, and it was really fascinating because the old way of government, which I thought, used to happen, isn't like that anymore. They're all in for 6 o'clock. They're all like whatever, flexible hours. They're like you've said, they were really smart. They were really validating what they're doing. They were, really embracing Agile, and, hats off to them. Actually, they were leading the way. But I remember when digital transformation came up, and there was all these great kind of case studies where people said, oh, well, the UK government has managed to put the petition website up in less than 3 months with open source and, with only 4 resources, and Gartner would get them to keynote, and, everyone would, celebrate the success. And then we know what happened, which was the petitions website went down when Brexit came upon us, and then when it finally came back up, it wasn't secure, so they couldn't work out which ones were just getting thrown at the API and which ones actually were genuine, so they shut it all down and restarted again. And the loss of confidence in that service, that government service, is that nobody really values that platform anymore. And do you feel that maybe this, I'm not going to call it Agile, I'm going to call it like that from a multimodal perspective, that fail fast, learn rapid, get something there in a couple of weeks' time, which is what a lot of organizations have had to do during COVID to kind of, bootstrap something like a queuing system on Boots for prescriptions or something, just so they can deal with the amount of traffic. Is the sticking it with a bit of super glue, the quick, getting it out quickly, the best way of doing it? Or do you think that there's a blend between, scaling Agile and, Scrum of Scrums, more enterprise-wide Agile, and, what works, it is a bit more mature than just, doing the ceremonies, and maybe not concentrating on the things that maybe you mentioned today about, the importance of flexing those kind of, the sprint cadence and all those things which people kind of go, well, we're going to do 2 weeks because that's the ceremony. So, do you think there's a balance there with what you're doing with your customers?
Yes, totally. So you know what? We love our acronyms in IT, and I think there are 2 acronyms that need to be taken out and shot right now, and that's POC and MVP. So proof of concept and minimal viable product. Okay, a proof of a concept. Okay, so take that example of the petitions website. Did they prove the concept that you can put a website online and you can run a petitions thing? Yeah, they proved the concept. Did they prove the value? No, absolutely not, because the value is you and me creating petitions and being able to say sign them. And then the value of values is the House of Commons debating them. And hopefully the value of the values is then when somebody actually changes the law as a result, that generally listen to the people thing. So proof of value rather than proof of concept. Proof of concept in IT tends to be slapping software together. Now, I'm simplifying horrendously there, but it's what I see quite often. Proof of value is really interesting. Now, I've got something that I'm working on at work at the moment, and I really can't tell you what it is, because it is a bit hush-hush, but I can say we are looking at the value and we are trying to prove that value. If that value proposition, it genuinely exists, if we can genuinely solve it in an easy and straightforward way, we will absolutely go for it. We're talking to people to understand what that is. Likewise, minimal viable product. Well, what do we mean by viable? Crikey, it even starts with a V. Why can't we call it a minimum valuable product? We're halfway there. It's even got the V at the start. So what is the minimum amount that we can deliver for you as a customer, for you as an end user, to get some value, to get you on with your lives? So take a theme park, going back to my Disney example, when Disney started up, in Euro Disney, they did not have every single ride they have today, but they had enough rides to deliver those smiling, happy faces, etc., to deliver that value. They can then increment and iterate and improve the value that they offer more value, offer different types of value, offer value to different sectors of society, different types of customer. All of that is incrementally a bigger slice of the pie, a bigger slice of the value pie. So you go from minimal viable product, and instead of that, we talk about valuable product. So we're now a minimal valuable product, and then we talk about incremental value. So absolutely, if we're going to scale anything, whether we're going to scale Scrum, we're going to scale anything, insert method, process, practice here, of X, whatever it might be. As we scale, what is the value that we are delivering today? What is the value we're delivering tomorrow? One maybe exception is we might want to do something today that enables future value. So we may want to pick an option today that leads to future value, but is itself less valuable today. Sort of example there is the original iPhone release. The original iPhone could not even work on 3G. They had to invent a 2.5G for it, as an example. Borderline valuable. I mean, obviously to Apple, it's very valuable with a lot of dollar signs, but borderline valuable to any consumer, just enough though to get it going, get that traction, prove that concept, or rather prove that value, and then iterate the iPhone over and over again. Same with Android, essentially. So yeah, absolutely. If we're going to scale things, we need to be looking at these value propositions. We need to be looking at how we scale value. We need to be going from multiple iterations of the minimum valuable product over time. So what is the MVP, minimum valuable product today, is different to that minimum valuable product tomorrow, the day after, the week, the month, the year after. Every time, reassess that minimum. This is what I'm doing with my teams constantly. Well, you know what, I'm going to take that back. I'm not doing that with my teams. My teams are just doing that. I'm getting people, I've got teams in the UK and India. My colleagues over in India will quite often send me a message saying, it's great you've come up with this thing, where's the value? And I'm like, oh crikey, I've come up with another harebrained idea, and we have that really good conversation. And only until we can see some actual value for somebody to make their life better, to improve the way they do things. And I work for a company that makes a profit, and makes a profit for us. That's not always a deciding factor, but of course it is an influencer. When we understand value from those multi-directions, then we can go ahead and implement something. But we should not be doing POCs like the parliamentary petitions website just because there's cool tech we should put together. Understand the value, then come up with the cool tech to support that.
I don't know. I completely agree with everything you've said today, actually, and I really love it in the sense that I have to make sure that is actually in the title because, this value-driven delivery kind of approach, what you're talking about, I love it. The kind of proof of value, and also, we used to have something we used to call MVVVP, which was like a minimum viable, validatable, and verifiable, product, and it was, again, it was that same kind of, we're building something that we know is not quite there, and that's fine. Part of this, which is why Agile and that ability to fail fast and learn from experiments and all these kind of great stuff that's coming through. But it was interesting. One of the points that was brought up on yesterday's roundtable was, well, actually, should it ever be finished? Shouldn't it be Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, completely iterating? It's a full feedback. You learn from production, you start again, think, make, check, think, make, check, think. You're going around in circles. That actually what you're doing is you're, like you've said with the 2.5 Gs, you're actually saying, okay, this is a 2.5 G, then we're going to do a 3, then we'll do a 4, then we're going to do a 5, and actually have that kind of that roadmap in your head. And part of a scaled agile framework, so it's kind of stuff Dean's put together, where your value stream mapping and you kind of the idea of capabilities and your portfolio level kind of really high view of product increments. And the idea is that that life cycle isn't going to be the end of a project where everyone drops off once product X is delivered. Is actually product X is going to evolve, and it's going to continue becoming something which is going to increasingly add value. And I think that's where you've kind of nailed it, in the sense if you've actually started with, well, what is the value proposition? What are we trying to deliver, and who is it for, and how do we improve on what was happened before, like Hewlett and Packard did in the garage, with is build and learn from each version of the calculator they built, with each hardware or software they built. They would keep on learning from that, and I think that is a really refreshing approach to what you're talking about. Actually, I'm really excited about your Unicom session.
Yeah, it is exciting to think in those ways, but I want to add something in though. So I kind of want to. Oh, God, maybe this is the only bit with this whole conversation where we slightly disagree. Okay, when you said, is it finished? And I'm kind of paraphrasing, but you were talking about, obviously, we would continue and we'd iterate more value tomorrow in our next iteration, or if we have a continuous value stream and flow and cadence, etc. However we're delivering, every one of those releases should add to our value. Not necessarily add to the software, because then you just get bloat, but add to the value. I actually challenge that slightly. I think that that is fantastic, but we can go better than that. We go better than that when we assume that we are never doing another version of our software stack. Uh, imagine if Microsoft announced to their teams that they've got one more version of Word and that's it. Their entire rest of their careers, every time they talk about Word from that point onwards, that's that last version, nothing else. We're talking about Office 365. No doubt the next version will bring in the leap year. So I'm going to pretend it's called Office 366. So Word 366 is your very last version. Do the best bit of work you've ever done in your lives, because that's the most value. That is the most value you can ever get from that. Now, if we think in those terms, okay, that might sound like it puts a hell of a lot of pressure on teams to actually, as long as we, coach people and counsel them that we're having this as a conversation, an idea rather than an absolute requirement. We can start getting our teams to think about that not only should they be doing value, they should be doing the best possible value now, because there's different scales of value. I like bananas. Bananas have a value to me in flavour, for example, but I prefer strawberries. Strawberries from a flavour point of view are more valuable. So given a choice of a banana or a strawberry, I'll go for the strawberry, So assume we are never doing another version. It's a pure mental construct. Clearly we are doing another version, but assume we're not. What's the best bit of value, the most awesome bit of value? What is the most incredible new thing we can deliver to our client? And again, that new thing does not have to be more software. It could be taking software out, making something leaner and easier to use, for example, improving usability. But what's that absolute golden thing that we can deliver that the customer's going to go, yeah, I'm so glad I got that. Right, that's the thing we should focus on. Repeat that time after time, and that's where you get valuable products, rather than saying, oh, okay, it's okay to deliver value now because we know we will deliver more value in the next version. Instead, best value now, best value next, best value after that.
No, that does make a lot of sense. And, I know it probably would, for people like James Whitaker and Alan Pace, they'd agree, from a Microsoft perspective, if they were going to do the last ever version of Word,
Yeah.
And in theory, they have done the last ever version of Word, which is why it's Word 365. You don't know that they've updated it. It just updated. If you use the browser, you just refresh your browser, right? And you've got new features. And, part of, when Alan wrote the book on how Microsoft tests, right, he kind of said, what was the difference between him starting when he joined Microsoft and when he left Microsoft? He kind of said to me, he said, oh, well, actually, it's about the fact that I can get that feedback about what people do with the application in real time or within minutes and hours, instead of having to wait for it, right? So they do a product release, see if it was sticky, see if people actually used it. And with Microsoft Operations Manager now, even on their Xbox platform, someone's taking a corner and it's slowing down because actually the machine's overheating, or it's something's happened, or the network's lagging, or whatever it may be. They're continuously monitoring that information and improving on the product on what matters the most, right? And it's a great example what you said, like Word, mail merge, right? And I used to love Ami Pro. It was much, Lotus 123, much better than the Microsoft counterparts. If they said that was the last ever version, I'd have been fine, that's great. But part of it is these features, which are, like you pointed out, bloatware, right? They are just things that have extra features have been added for the sake of extra features, like mail merge may be, and label printing may not be as relevant as the fact that we can, it's digital, right? So it's the telemetry, what's built into the product, which is understanding those use cases and understanding, yes, there's edge cases, which is still somebody is printing off those labels and mail merging by hand. But actually what we want to do is focus the attention of those ones, which is why they clean the UI up over and over again, and it's all about highlighting those commonly used functions. But again, you might be a power user, you might want to go to developer mode and start adding things in there because it's the only bit where you see any value. But that's the viewpoint that what you do is also, it's kind of time to quality. It's kind to that kind of, well, there's a brand, there's an expectation of the product, and we are meeting that expectation and smashing it out of the park. And we're really committed to continue that as a product, where Word becomes, the one you load up on your Mac or you load on your iPad. Part of it is you're starting to get to that point going, well, actually, I don't need to use Pages anymore because I can see I've got the same user interface. I know where I'm going. They're not changing where everything is every 3 weeks like shopping centers do to make you want to go and buy more. They are making it your life easier. They're making you more productive. You're able to do more with less. You become more lean, and they're getting the outcomes. And if the outcome is they're achieving their goals, you're helping them with the software. And I think that's what you're saying is actually give them the best possible software they can possibly need. And don't just, because you've got capacity in the sprint for another 40 or 50 velocity, build them something else that you think is the next thing on the list that they'd like. Actually is focus on what's needed for the end customer and how you can flex around with resourcing pools and
absolutely. I mean, you're touching on actually the depreciation of value. So if I have something that has, let's say, 100%, well, nothing ever has 100% value, so let's say 99% value today, then it's 98, 97, that value starts decreasing essentially. And I've got to make use of that value as fast as possible because, my customers are literally paying me money. I work at Capita, we work with external clients. They're paying us lots of dollar signs to deliver wonderful software solutions for them. Okay, if I hold on to that software solution for a week, 2 weeks, a month, or crikey, if it's a waterfall project and hold on to it for 3 to 9 months, whatever, the value that they can actually realize is lower. So they're paying 100% of the money for hopefully 99% of the value. Again, nothing's ever perfect, so there's always slight, wiggle room there. But wouldn't it be awful if they were paying 100% of the money, but by the time it's depreciated, they're only getting 50% of the value? I don't like that. I don't think that's fair on the customer. So I go for, let's give that value as fast as we can. I've got one particular product at the moment that when something's done, it is out the door. I've got a beautiful build pipeline. We've got automated testing end to end in that. It's automatic. Someone commits something in, it just passes through the various gates automatically and goes out the door. Some things we have to manually check for various reasons, but that's the general rule. That's what you want. You want that value stream to being delivered. I have a value today. I want the delivery today. That's, how close, how short a distance can we get between identifying value and satisfying that value need?
And that's that time to value kind of what you're looking at. And I think, that it's great. Honestly, it sounds really good what you guys are doing because that's what's really important. A customer wants something now or they're wanting to pivot their organization. And I think a lot of organizations have had challenges during COVID where maybe they've had to shut stores or maybe they've had to, pivot slightly. And someone like Capita gives them that kind of capability to say, okay, let's have a look at what you've got. We're not going to throw it away. We're going to leverage what you've got, but we're going to bring you this new value proposition. And we're also going to make you realize that benefit realization as soon as you possibly can so that you can pass that value on to your customers. And actually that is a really different thing to say, well, actually we could build you, anything you want. But actually as time, like you said, decays the value of certain propositions, that actually be able to get it fast to the market using these methodologies, which, like you said, your guys are looking at it and thinking about the value of it and like you said at the start, the value of the automation. We're going to fully, automate everything we possibly can, which adds value because we want to be able to get things out really quickly. And we're not going to waste our time on things that aren't going to give you value because actually we're giving you that transparency and that trust that actually we're going to give you the best quality product with the most value within the shortest time without bloatware, without doing new things that are the crazy new technologies just because nano services are out, so we should change all our target architecture. We will give you what your customers need and we will be transparent and honest with what we're doing. And I think that is the way businesses need these kind of organizations to support them.
You've got to be honest. You've got to be honest in what you do. So you know what, I work where I work and I do what I do because I have that opportunity to be honest in what I do. And it would really annoy me if I found myself working somewhere else and that somewhere else was a place that did not value honesty, did not value that transparency. I love the conversations I have with my customers. I'm having this conversation at the moment where I won't name, but it's one of those old school conversations where they're basically, I've got a CRM system, can you add a bunch of fields to it? And I want a bunch of fields so that I've got a bunch of fields to report on. And why do you want the bunch of fields to report on? Because I want to create PowerPoints of data tables to take into meetings with boards and executives. And you sort of go, I could do that, and you wouldn't get the value you think you're going to get, because what you're going to get is a bunch of tables in front of a bunch of executives. What you really want to do is influence those executives. The value is getting an executive to make a better business decision. So that's DIKW, data, information, knowledge, wisdom, essentially. You want to be on the right-hand side of that equation, the knowledge and the wisdom. And what you're asking us to do is implement functionality that's the left-hand side, the data information. We know we have to collect the data. We know we have to process it into information, but we have to present it back to you in a way that makes sense. Let's minimize the amount of data that we collect to only focus on those things that we can translate in a way that enables you to give a good pitch to your execs, to the customer, and gets them to make the best possible business decision, saving the most money for this particular company we're working with, and giving them the most value for their end customers in the market. So we're actually, I'm not afraid to say no to stuff. This ability to have an honest conversation, you have to be able to say no to something sometimes, and add fields to forms is often something that needs to be said no to, or at least challenged to understand what's the value behind those fields, and are they really needed, and do they even need to be added to forms? Could they be calculated and hidden away and never shown to an end user so it doesn't clutter a UI, whatever it might be? So yeah, absolutely, that honesty, that ability to have good quality conversations, it's right up there in the top 3 or 4 things, if not the first thing, that's at the list of what I value.
Yeah, no, and I think it's kind of brave as well, in the sense of, this idealization phase where customers got an idea in their head that they want something, and like you said, you actually then turning the conversation into where it becomes a value conversation, and actually you're talking about the extra value you can deliver and what that will mean. I remember working. I was at the Infinite Loop offices, and Tim had wanted this kind of new requirement. We had a number of SIs that were the normal kind of guys that you'd expect, and he said, "I want to know what products people are buying on the App Store." And so there was a whole stack of us that were trying to work it out, and we failed, right? We wanted it to work, but every Apple transaction was an ESAP transaction. It was a SAP transaction. 300,000 transactions or whatever they were doing. There was no way that we were going to be able to give them any insight into what was being, downloaded off the App Store, which is where the majority of the money was coming from Apple, because it would, even if we tried to do all these clever things with Sugar CRM and SAP, and then create a data lake and, get the insights to them faster, there's some limitations, and there's some kind of rework and re-architecture of a huge scale of systems to make that work. And obviously the value is huge for them, but part of it is there's a lot of legacy, right? So even with organizations like Apple and PayPal, who are still based on x.com systems from Elon Musk, part of it is sometimes there's a really difficult proposition to modernize them, to actually be able to get to the point where they could answer those questions, or they could, bring what the coolest new apps are, or give you, disruptive services like PayPal do now offer. And I think that's a lot of organizations out there which rely on Capita, and, like the government, which have got a lot of, COBOL still running 95% of all transactions or something on mainframe. That modernization kind of landscape is so hard for some customers, because that's all they can see is 4 new fields in their CRM ERP system to give them this ability to report on something on a monthly basis. That's how their minds are thinking, is monthly or quarterly or annually what's important to the board or their shareholders.
Yeah, this is why I think that techniques inside the Agile space, let's say, I'm being very careful with my words here, because I don't want to, I'm intentionally not trying to say the words Scrum, Kanban, etc. So I'm using Agile in its widest possible scope here. So let's call it an Agile space. Techniques inside that Agile space to have those conversations are incredibly important. And this kind of goes back into my talk that I'm doing for Unicorn, which is very much, if we're using a prescriptive technique, or if we believe a technique we've picked is prescriptive. A classic example. So, in the original Agile Manifesto and Principles, which has clearly been subverted and changed many times, but the original principles, you see it on the website today, it very much talks about that the team should regularly review. In other words, it should have a regular retrospective, is what it's talking about. It certainly does not say at the end of every sprint, which also does not mean at the end of every 2-week period, because nothing in sprint says it must be 2 weeks. So if we're picking a prescriptive way of looking at the world, where we're saying we must do a 2-week iteration, we must have only one conversation every 2 weeks to look at how we improved, then we're in that kind of odd space where we can't actually be focused on that delivery, because what we're doing instead is we're working to a clock. We're strange things as human beings. What is it in the UK? What is it with 5 p.m? The clock hits 5 p.m. and the UK closes for the day. I remember as a child being down at a beach, and my parents used to, could kind of spotted this 5 p.m. thing. We'd be on the beach, really enjoying ourselves. Look at our watch. It hits 5 p.m. The beach empties. Beaches don't close at 5 p.m. in the UK. The tide is still going in and out. The sand is still there. If it's the summer, it doesn't even get dark till 8 p.m. So you've definitely got 3 more hours. Beach would empty. So we used to then have pretty much a beach for ourselves for another hour or two before we would go home, essentially, which is great for kicking a ball around. That's how we work in the real world, except we don't. We are constrained to this idea of 5 p.m. So if we have Scrum, or a misunderstanding of Scrum that believes we are constrained to 5 p.m. The 5 p.m. in Scrum would be, it must be 2 weeks and it must be a retrospective at the end. That's not a good place to be. And of course, that's not what Scrum says. That's not what the Agile Manifesto says. But like it or not, that is what the industry now believes. Because Agile equals Scrum and Scrum equals a prescriptive set of this is how you must do things to be successful. That is what the industry has unfortunately sold to people through various consultancies. Instead, what I think we should be doing instead is saying, I'm trying to get to this end point in this iteration to hit that singularity where my customer jumps up and down and goes, yay, gives me a high five and buys me a pint in the pub because they've said, job well done. And they've got some new bit of value, or they've improved some value, or they've fixed some faulty value that wasn't quite working for them, whatever. To do that, we need to pick a range of techniques. And this is why I very much talk about leanifying Scrum. This is why I say how lean is your Scrum. Lean has 8 forms of waste, because one was added. 8 forms of waste in lean are very defined. How do those apply to Scrum? Are you running a retrospective only at the end? Why are you waiting 2 weeks to improve? That's certainly not continuous improvement. Could you have a conversation every week? Maybe your teams don't even need a conversation at the end. Absolute heresy here. I have one team that does not sit down at the end of their iteration to have a retrospective, because they found a better way to do it that works for them. On Microsoft Teams, every day they ping each other messages and they say, hey, have you tried this? And what about that? And maybe we could look at fixing this and doing this differently. That cadence leads to an improvement or two every day or so. Why would I interrupt that? Why would I say, no, I'm sorry, team, you must sit down once every 2 weeks for a formal meeting, because that's what Scrum says. And again, the original version of Scrum did not say that, and people have misunderstood retrospectives now. Now, don't get me wrong, retrospectives are fantastic in context. It is just that this team has found a different way to achieve the same end goal for them, as in continuous improvement. They do it at a cadence that is much greater than once every 2 weeks. I like that. I think that's quite a nice thing for them to do, really.
Absolutely. And I love the idea, what you're saying now, where actually, you could have 2, 3, 4 different Scrum teams, scrums of scrums, all doing it the way that works for them, right? And, it was kind of where when we had the whole requirements then to stories or something, it just, the old ALM tool didn't fit the kind of the way that we the terminology we were using is that getting your head around it and what works for the organization, but also having that experience which you guys have got, which can help. So I'm really looking forward to your talk on the 17th of July, 10 o'clock. We're giving away 10 free tickets, so for listeners. So it'll be good to get to your session. And I think I'm going to help with the Slido questions at the end, and we'll maybe bring up some of these topics. It should be really interesting and exciting. And Colin, it's been absolutely fantastic chatting with you. For the listeners that are out there, what's the best way to kind of reach out, or if you've got any like blogs on what you've been talking about, or kind of LinkedIn, which is the easiest way to get in touch with you?
Easiest way to get in touch with me. My LinkedIn profile's out there. Search my name, you'll find me about 3 seconds. And also colin.deady@capita.com will be the easiest way to contact me, by good old school email, I think, at the moment.
I love email. So, all right. Well, thanks so much, Colin. And it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today.